The rejection letter trembled in Rosalind Hastings' hands as she stood on the dusty platform of Calistoga Station, California, her trunk at her feet and her heart somewhere down around her borrowed boots. After 3 weeks of traveling west from Boston in 1878, surviving cramped train cars and questionable meals, she had arrived to find not a hopeful groom but a terse note from the local preacher explaining that Mr. Theodore Walsh had changed his mind upon learning her true height from mutual correspondence and would not be honoring their agreement. Miss Hastings, a portly man in a black suit, approached, mopping his brow with a handkerchief despite the mild spring weather. "I am Reverend Patterson. I am terribly sorry about this unfortunate situation. Mr. Walsh, he just felt that a woman of your stature would not be suitable for his household." Rosalind straightened her spine, which only emphasized the very thing that had gotten her rejected. At 6 feet tall, she towered over most men and all the women she had ever known. Back in Boston, her unusual height had made her the subject of whispers and pitying looks. Her own mother had despaired of ever finding her a husband, which was why the mail-order bride arrangement had seemed like such a blessing. Out west, she had hoped, perhaps things would be different. Perhaps a man working a ranch would appreciate a strong, tall woman who could help with the labor. Apparently not. "I see," Rosalind said, keeping her voice steady though she felt like crumbling. "What am I supposed to do now? I have spent nearly all my money on the journey here." Reverend Patterson looked deeply uncomfortable. "There is a boarding house in town run by Mrs. Chen. She might have room for you temporarily. Perhaps you could find work. We have a schoolteacher position that might be opening up in the fall." "That is months away," Rosalind said, the reality of her situation sinking in like a stone in her stomach. She had burned her bridges in Boston, said her goodbyes, sold what little she owned. There was nothing to go back to. "I truly am sorry," the Reverend said again, and he did sound genuinely distressed. "This is most irregular, most unseemly of Walsh to back out at the last moment." A commotion at the other end of the platform drew their attention. Several men were unloading crates from the freight car, and one box had apparently broken open, spilling its contents across the wooden planks. The workers scrambled to gather up what appeared to be farming tools, and one man cursed loudly as he narrowly avoided a falling pickaxe. "Let me help you to the boarding house," Reverend Patterson offered, reaching for her trunk. "I can manage it," Rosalind said, lifting the heavy trunk herself. She had learned long ago that her height came with strength, and she was not afraid of physical labor. The Reverend looked startled but said nothing, leading her down the platform steps and onto the main street of Calistoga. The town was small but bustling, with wooden buildings lining either side of a wide dirt road. A saloon, a general store, a hotel, a livery stable, and various other establishments competed for space. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and majestic against the blue California sky. Despite her circumstances, Rosalind felt a flutter of something almost like hope. It was beautiful here, so different from the crowded streets of Boston. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a neat 2-story structure painted white with green shutters. The proprietress herself answered the door, a small Chinese woman with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. "I need a room," Rosalind said directly. "I can pay for 2 weeks, and then I will need to find work." Mrs. Chen looked her up and down without any visible reaction to her height. $5 a week includes breakfast and dinner. Laundry is extra. No men in the rooms, no drinking, no trouble." "That sounds perfectly acceptable," Rosalind said, relief washing through her. "Room 3, top of the stairs," Mrs. Chen said, accepting the money Rosalind counted out from her dwindling purse. "Dinner is at 6. Reverend Patterson excused himself, promising to inquire about employment opportunities, and Rosalind carried her trunk up the narrow staircase. Room 3 was small but clean, with a single bed, a washstand, a chair, and a window overlooking the street. It was not what she had hoped for when she left Boston, but it was shelter, and she would make the best of it. She sat on the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of her disappointment. She was 22 years old, alone in a strange town, with limited funds and no prospects. But Rosalind Hastings had not survived growing up different, growing up too tall and too strong for what society expected of a woman without developing a certain resilience. She would not cry. She would not give up. She would find a way forward. After washing her face and changing into a fresh dress, she went downstairs to explore the town. If she was going to live here, at least temporarily, she needed to understand the place. The general store seemed like a good place to start. A bell jangled as she entered, and the proprietor, a balding man with spectacles, looked up from his ledger. His eyes widened slightly at her height, but he smiled pleasantly enough. "Afternoon, miss. What can I help you with?" "I am just looking around, thank you," Rosalind said, browsing the shelves. Everything was more expensive than in Boston, she noted. Her funds would not last long at these prices. "You must be the lady who came in on the train today," the proprietor said. "News travels fast in a small town." "Name is Henry Moss. I run this establishment." "Rosalind Hastings," she replied, seeing no point in being standoffish. "I am looking for employment if you know of anything available." "Well, let me think," Henry said, scratching his chin. "Mrs. Whitmore needs help with her laundry business. Doc Brennan sometimes needs an assistant, and I suppose some of the ranchers might need extra hands, though ranch work is hard." "I am not afraid of hard work," Rosalind said firmly. "I can see that," Henry said, and there was approval in his voice. "You might try the Iverson Ranch. Big spread about 5 miles north of town. Sterling Iverson runs it. He is always needing help, especially this time of year with calving and all." "Sterling Iverson," Rosalind repeated, committing the name to memory. "How would I get there?" "You can rent a horse from the livery, or if you wait until tomorrow, the supply wagon goes out that way. Sterling comes into town most Saturdays too, but that is a few days off yet." Rosalind thanked him and left the store, her mind already turning over possibilities. Ranch work would be hard, but she was tall and strong. She could probably do things most women could not. It was worth investigating. She spent the rest of the afternoon walking through Calistoga, getting a feel for the rhythms of the place. It was so different from Boston, rougher and more immediate. Men wore guns on their hips openly. Women in practical calico dresses hurried about their business. A group of cowboys rode past, laughing and calling to each other in high spirits. Dinner at the boarding house was a quiet affair. Only 2 other residents were present, both older men who worked at the local mill. They nodded politely to Rosalind but kept to themselves. Mrs. Chen served a simple but hearty meal of stew and bread, and Rosalind ate gratefully. That night, lying in her narrow bed, she stared at the ceiling and made herself a promise. She would not let Theodore Walsh's rejection define her. She would build a life here on her own terms, and if that meant working a ranch or taking in laundry or teaching school, so be it. She was not going to fail. The next morning, Rosalind woke with the sun and dressed in her most practical outfit, a simple brown dress that would not show dirt easily. After breakfast, she walked to the livery stable, where a young man with a friendly face was mucking out stalls. "Excuse me," she called. "I need to get to the Iverson Ranch. Is there a supply wagon going that way today?" The young man looked up, his jaw dropping slightly when he saw her. Rosalind was used to this reaction and waited patiently. Yeah," he said, recovering himself. Ben is taking a load out there this morning. Should be leaving in about an hour. You can ask him if you can ride along. Where would I find Ben? That would be me, said a voice from behind her. Rosalind turned to see a weathered man in his 50s leading a team of horses. You need something. A ride to the Iverson ranch if you are going there, Rosalind said. I am looking for work. Ben looked her over, his expression thoughtful. Ranch work is no joke, miss. Long hours, hard labor, and Sterling Iverson expects folks to pull their weight. I am capable, Rosalind said simply. Something in her tone must have convinced him because he nodded. All right then. Help me hitch up this team and you can ride along. Rosalind did not hesitate, moving to help with the harness. She had never hitched a team before, but she watched carefully and did as Ben instructed. He seemed pleasantly surprised by her willingness and competence. An hour later, they were rolling out of town in a wagon loaded with supplies. The road was rough, more of a track really, winding through golden hills dotted with oak trees. The morning air was fresh and cool, carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers. Rosalind found herself relaxing despite her nervousness about the upcoming interview. You that mail-order bride that got rejected? Ben asked after a while, his tone conversational rather than prying. Yes, Rosalind said. There was no point in denying it. Theodore Walsh is a fool, Ben said bluntly. No offense meant to you, but he is a small man in more ways than one. Always complaining, always finding fault. You are better off without him. Thank you, Rosalind said, surprised by his vehemence. Now Sterling Iverson, he is a different sort altogether, Ben continued. Good man, fair employer, works harder than anyone on his own ranch. His family has had that land for 20 years, came out here when this was still real rough country. He has built something solid. Is he married? Rosalind asked, then immediately regretted the question. It sounded like she was sizing him up as a prospect, which she absolutely was not. She just wanted work, Ben chuckled. No, Sterling is not married. A lot of ladies have tried too. He is what you might call particular. Also, he is a bit unusual himself, which maybe makes him choosy. Unusual how? Rosalind asked, curious despite herself. You will see, Ben said mysteriously, and would not say more on the subject. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the wagon creaking and rattling over the rough road. Cattle dotted the hills, grazing peacefully. Hawks circled overhead. It was a beautiful, empty landscape, and Rosalind felt something in her chest loosen. There was space here, room to breathe. Room to be different. The Iverson ranch came into view around mid-morning. It was more substantial than Rosalind had expected, with a large main house, a barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. Everything looked well-maintained, prosperous. Several horses stood in one of the corrals, and chickens scratched in the yard near what must be the kitchen. As the wagon rolled up to the house, a figure emerged from the barn, and Rosalind understood immediately what Ben had meant by unusual. Sterling Iverson was quite possibly the tallest man she had ever seen. He had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, maybe even more, with broad shoulders and long limbs. He moved with easy grace despite his size, striding across the yard with confident steps. As he drew closer, Rosalind could make out more details. He was probably in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin, dark hair that needed a trim, and striking light blue eyes and a strong-featured face. He wore work clothes, dusty and well-worn, and a battered hat pushed back on his head. "Morning, Ben," he called, his voice a deep rumble. "Got my supplies?" "I do indeed," Ben said, pulling the wagon to a halt. "And I have brought you a visitor. This is Miss Rosalind Hastings. She is looking for work." Sterling's gaze shifted to Rosalind, and she saw his eyes widen slightly. But unlike every other man she had met since arriving in California, he did not look shocked or put off by her height. Instead, something that looked almost like recognition flickered across his face. "Miss Hastings," he said, touching his hat brim in greeting. "What kind of work are you looking for?" Rosalind climbed down from the wagon, grateful that for once she did not tower over the man she was speaking to. Sterling was still considerably taller than her, which was a novel experience. "Any honest work you have available," she said directly. "I can cook, clean, help with animals, mend fences, whatever you need. I'm strong and I learn quickly." Sterling studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "You are the mail-order bride Theodore Walsh rejected." It was not a question, but Rosalind answered anyway. "Yes. He found me unsuitable due to my height." "His loss," Sterling said immediately, and there was such matter-of-fact certainty in his tone that Rosalind felt warmth spread through her chest. "Ranch work is hard, Miss Hastings. I would not want to take advantage of someone desperate for employment." "I am not looking for charity," Rosalind said, lifting her chin. "I am looking for an opportunity to prove myself. Give me a trial period, 1 week. If I cannot do the work, I will leave with no complaint." Sterling's stern expression softened into something that might have been approval. "Fair enough. I can offer room and board plus $15 a month. The work starts at dawn and ends at dusk, sometimes later. Mostly you would help my current hand, Jake, with the daily tasks, feeding stock, mending equipment, that sort of thing. During calving season it can get intense. I do my own cooking, but if you can cook decently, that would be appreciated. I am not much for fancy food." "I can cook," Rosalind confirmed. "When would you want me to start?" "Might as well be now if you are willing," Sterling said. "Ben, you mind taking Miss Hastings back to town later to collect her things?" "I can do that," Ben agreed. "Actually," Rosalind said, making a quick decision, "I have very little to collect, just a trunk at the boarding house. If it is all right, I could start today and retrieve my belongings tomorrow." Sterling looked surprised but nodded. "All right then. Help Ben unload these supplies and I will show you around the place." For the next hour, Rosalind worked alongside Ben and Sterling, carrying crates and sacks into the house and the barn. The work was physical, but she handled it easily, her long arms and strong back making quick work of even the heavier loads. She noticed Sterling watching her a few times, but his expression was approving rather than critical. After Ben left, Sterling gave her a tour of the ranch. The main house was simple but comfortable, with a large kitchen, a sitting room, and several bedrooms upstairs. Sterling pointed out a small bedroom off the kitchen that had apparently once been a pantry, but had been converted into a sleeping space. "That was my mother's room when she got too sick to manage the stairs," Sterling explained. "She passed 2 years ago. You can use it while you are here." "I am sorry for your loss," Rosalind said quietly. "Thank you," Sterling said, and she could hear the old grief in his voice. "She was a good woman, strong like you. She would have liked you." There was something about the way he said it that made Rosalind's heart skip, but she pushed the feeling aside. This was employment, nothing more. The barn was well organized, with several horses in stalls and equipment neatly stored. Sterling introduced her to each horse, rattling off names and temperaments. There was also a cow that was apparently someone's pet, which made Rosalind smile. "That is Buttercup," Sterling said, sounding slightly embarrassed. "She was orphaned as a calf and I raised her by hand. Could never bring myself to sell her." "She is lovely," Rosalind said, reaching out to stroke the cow's soft nose. Buttercup leaned into her hand and Sterling laughed, a deep, warm sound. "You have a way with animals," he observed. "I have always liked them better than most people," Rosalind admitted. "I know that feeling," Sterling said, and there was understanding in his eyes. They walked out to the far pasture, where several dozen cattle grazed peacefully. Sterling explained the layout of his land, the rotation of pastures, the water sources. He talked about his plans to expand the herd, his concerns about the dry summer ahead. Rosalind listened carefully, asking questions when she did not understand something. "You catch on quick," Sterling said as they walked back toward the house. "Most folks' eyes glaze over when I start talking about grazing rotation." "I find it interesting," Rosalind said honestly. "There is a logic to it, a system. I like that." They were approaching the house when a rider appeared, a lean man in his 40s with a weather-beaten face and a cautious expression. This must be Jake, the hand Sterling had mentioned. "Boss," Jake said, dismounting. His eyes slid to Rosalind, widening slightly. "Who is this?" "This is Miss Rosalind Hastings," Sterling said. "She is going to be helping out around here. Rosalind, this is Jake Morneau. He has been with me for 5 years." "Pleased to meet you," Rosalind said, offering her hand. Jake shook it after a moment's hesitation, his grip firm. "Likewise." "We getting help because of calving season." "That and a dozen other reasons," Sterling said. "Show her how you feed the chickens, will you? I need to check on that mare in the north paddock." As Sterling strode away, his long legs eating up the distance, Jake turned to Rosalind with an expression that was hard to read. "You ever worked on a ranch before?" he asked. "No," Rosalind admitted. "But I am a quick learner and I am not afraid of hard work." Jake grunted, which she took as tentative acceptance. "All right then. Come on, I will show you the chicken situation." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Jake showed her how to feed the chickens, collect eggs, how to check the water troughs in the various paddocks, how to recognize signs of distress in the animals. He was a patient teacher, and Rosalind absorbed everything like a sponge. By the time the sun began to set, she was exhausted but satisfied. She had done real work, useful work, and she had done it well. When Sterling came back to the house and found her preparing a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, he looked surprised and pleased. "You did not have to do this," he said. "You are feeding me," Rosalind replied. "I should earn my keep." They ate together at the kitchen table, Jake joining them. The conversation was easy, mostly Sterling and Jake discussing the day's work and the tasks ahead. Rosalind listened, learning more about the rhythm and routine of ranch life. When Jake left to head to his own small cabin on the property, Sterling turned to Rosalind. "You did well today," he said. "Real well. If you can keep this up for a week, the job is yours for as long as you want it." "Thank you," Rosalind said, feeling a swell of pride. "I will not let you down." Sterling studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "Can I ask you something? And feel free to tell me it is none of my business." "Go ahead," Rosalind said, curious. "Why did you agree to come west as a mail-order bride? You seem like the kind of woman who could make her own way anywhere." Rosalind considered her answer carefully. "In Boston, I was a curiosity. Too tall, too strong, too different. My mother despaired of ever finding me a husband, and without a husband, my prospects were limited. I could have been a governess or a companion to some wealthy old lady, spending my life making myself small and invisible. The mail-order bride arrangement offered something different. A chance to go somewhere new, to be useful, maybe even to be wanted. It seemed worth the risk." "And Theodore Walsh proved you wrong," Sterling said, anger flashing in his eyes. "Theodore Walsh proved that some people cannot see past their own narrow expectations," Rosalind corrected. "But in a way, I am grateful to him. If he had not rejected me, I would not have found this opportunity." "Do you mean that?" Sterling asked. Rosalind met his gaze steadily. "I do. I know I have only been here one day, but I feel more myself here than I have in years. More free." Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Sterling said softly. I felt the same way when my family moved here from Ohio. Back there, I was the freak, the giant boy that everyone stared at. Out here, size is an advantage, strength is respected. Nobody cares if you are different as long as you can do the work. How tall are you? Rosalind asked, then blushed. I apologize, that is personal. Sterling smiled, transforming his stern face into something almost boyish. 6 feet 8 inches last time I measured. You? 6 feet exactly, Rosalind said. You wear it well, Sterling said, and there was admiration in his voice that made her blush deepen. An awkward silence fell, and Rosalind quickly stood to clear the dishes. Sterling helped, and they worked side by side in companionable quiet. When everything was clean, Sterling showed her to her small room and bid her good night. Alone in the darkness, Rosalind found herself replaying the day in her mind. Sterling Iverson was not what she had expected. He was kind, fair, and surprisingly easy to talk to. And there was no denying he was handsome in a rough, outdoorsy way. But more than that, he had looked at her and seen not a freakish tall woman but a capable person. He had not been put off by her height or her strength. If anything, he had seemed to appreciate both. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, more hopeful than she had been in months. The next several days fell into a pattern. Rosalind rose before dawn, helped Sterling prepare breakfast, then spent the day working alongside Jake. She learned to mend fences, to recognize the signs of impending birth in the pregnant cows, to handle the horses confidently. Her hands grew calloused and her muscles ached, but it was a good ache, the ache of honest labor. Sterling was a constant presence, always working harder than anyone else, but always ready to teach or help. Rosalind found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice. The way he moved with such easy grace despite his size, the gentleness with which he handled the animals, the rare smiles that transformed his serious face. On the 4th day, Ben brought her trunk from town. Sterling carried it easily up to her room, making light work of what had been a burden for her. That evening, after dinner, Rosalind unpacked her few belongings. She had brought some books, a few mementos from her mother, and tucked in the bottom, her better dresses and a music box that had been her grandmother's. She wound the music box and let the delicate melody fill the small room. It played a waltz, sweet and lilting, and for a moment Rosalind was transported back to Boston, to the few balls she had attended where she had stood awkwardly on the sidelines, too tall to dance with any of the men. A knock on the door startled her. "Come in," she called. Sterling ducked through the doorway, his head nearly brushing the top of the frame. "I heard music. That is a beautiful tune." "It was my grandmother's," Rosalind said, showing him the delicate box. "One of the few things I have from her." "Do you like to dance?" Sterling asked, surprising her. "I never had much opportunity," Rosalind admitted. "In Boston, I was too tall to partner with anyone." Something flickered across Sterling's face, some emotion she could not quite identify. "That is a shame," he said quietly. "Everyone should have the chance to dance." He left shortly after, and Rosalind sat on her bed, wondering at the strange melancholy that had settled over her. On Saturday, Sterling announced they were all going into town for supplies. Rosalind changed into one of her nicer dresses, a dark blue cotton that brought out her eyes. When she emerged, Sterling did a double take, his eyes widening. "You look real pretty," he said, then seemed to realize what he had said and turned away quickly. "I mean, that is a nice dress." Rosalind felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, clumsy though they were. The trip into Calistoga was pleasant. Sterling drove the wagon while Rosalind sat beside him, and they talked easily about everything and nothing. She learned that he loved to read. that his favorite meal was apple pie, that he had once wanted to be a school teacher but his father had needed help on the ranch. He learned that she could speak French, that she had never seen the ocean despite living near it for years, that her secret dream had been to travel. "Maybe you still can," Sterling said. "California has plenty to see. The ocean is not that far, really. Few days' journey." "Maybe," Rosalind said, but she could not quite believe it would happen. In town, they stopped at the general store. Henry Moss greeted them cheerfully, his eyes darting between Rosalind and Sterling with obvious curiosity. "Afternoon, Sterling. Miss Hastings. Heard you were working at the Iverson place now." "That is right," Rosalind confirmed, holding her head high. Let people talk if they wanted to. As Sterling gathered his supplies, Rosalind browsed the small selection of books Henry kept in stock. She was examining a copy of a collection of Tennyson's poetry when she heard a familiar voice. "Well, if it is not the Hastings woman." She turned to find Theodore Walsh standing behind her. He was a small man, barely 5.5 feet tall, with a narrow face and pale eyes. Looking at him now, Rosalind could not imagine why she had ever agreed to marry him, correspondence or not. "Mr. Walsh," she said coolly. "I heard you were working at the Iverson ranch," Walsh said, his tone implying something unsavory. "I suppose that is more suitable than being a wife." "I suppose it is," Rosalind agreed, refusing to rise to the bait. "A woman of your size working like a man, it is unseemly," Walsh continued, warming to his theme. "You should be grateful I saved you from making a fool of yourself trying to be someone's wife." "I am grateful," Rosalind said. "Grateful that I discovered your character before I made the mistake of marrying you." Walsh's face flushed red. "Why you? Is there a problem here?" Sterling's deep voice cut through the air like a knife. He had appeared beside Rosalind, looming over Walsh like a mountain over a molehill. Walsh actually took a step back, his bluster deflating. "No problem, I was just chatting with Miss Hastings." "Looked more like you were insulting her," Sterling said, his tone dangerously mild. "In which case, I would suggest you apologize and move along." "I do not have to." Sterling took a single step forward, his size suddenly seeming much more menacing. "Apologize." "I apologize," Walsh stammered, then scurried toward the door. Rosalind felt laughter bubbling up inside her, and she had to clamp a hand over her mouth to contain it. Sterling looked down at her, his own lips twitching. "Did I overstep?" he asked. "Not at all," Rosalind managed. "That was extremely satisfying, thank you." "Any time," Sterling said, and the warmth in his eyes made her heart flutter. They finished their shopping and loaded the wagon. As they were preparing to leave, Reverend Patterson approached, looking relieved to see Rosalind. "Miss Hastings, I have been meaning to come out to the ranch to check on you. I feel somewhat responsible for your situation." "There is no need, Reverend," Rosalind assured him. "I am doing very well. Mr. Iverson has been a fair and kind employer." "I am glad to hear it," the Reverend said, looking genuinely pleased. Then he turned to Sterling. "You are coming to the dance next Saturday, I hope. We are raising funds for the new schoolhouse." "I had not planned on it," Sterling said, shifting uncomfortably. "Oh, you must come," the Reverend urged. "You too, Miss Hastings. It will be a wonderful opportunity for you to meet more people in the community." Rosalind had no desire to attend a dance where she would tower over all the men and spend the evening on the sidelines, but she smiled politely. "Perhaps." As they drove out of town, Sterling was quiet, his brow furrowed in thought. "You do not like dances?" Rosalind asked. "I like them fine," Sterling said. "I just do not usually attend. Hard to blend into the background when you are my size and women either stare or giggle or get nervous. It gets tiresome." "I understand that feeling completely," Rosalind said softly. Sterling glanced at her, and something passed between them, a moment of true understanding. They were the same, she realized. Different from others in the same way, isolated by the very physical traits that made them strong. "We could go together," Sterling said suddenly, then seemed to realize what he had suggested. "I mean, if you wanted to go, I would be happy to escort you, so you would not have to worry about going alone." Rosalind's heart was beating too fast. "I would like that," she heard herself say. Sterling's face broke into a genuine smile, and Rosalind felt like the sun had come out from behind clouds. The following week seemed to fly by. Rosalind worked hard, but her mind kept drifting to the upcoming dance. She found herself thinking about Sterling at odd moments, remembering the way he laughed, the gentleness of his hands when he worked with the animals, the sound of his voice when he sang while working. Because Sterling did sing while working. She had discovered this one afternoon when she had come around the barn unexpectedly and heard his deep voice carrying a surprisingly sweet melody. He had been embarrassed when he realized she was listening, but she had assured him she enjoyed it. On Friday, the day before the dance, 2 cows went into labor. It was Rosalind's first experience with difficult births, and she followed Sterling's and Jake's lead, doing whatever they asked. One calf came without difficulty, but the second was breech, requiring Sterling to intervene physically. It was messy, exhausting work, but when the second calf finally arrived, alive and bawling, Rosalind felt a surge of triumph. "You did good," Sterling said, both of them covered in mud and worse. "Real good. Not everyone can handle this kind of thing." "It was incredible," Rosalind said, watching the mother cow clean her baby. "I have never seen anything be born before. It was hard but beautiful." Sterling looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You are something else, Rosalind Hastings." The way he said her name, soft and wondering, made her pulse race. That night, as she cleaned up and tried to make herself presentable for bed, Rosalind admitted to herself what she had been trying to ignore. She was developing feelings for Sterling Iverson. Deep, complicated feelings that went far beyond gratitude or respect. She liked him. Genuinely liked him in a way she had never liked anyone before. The question was, did he feel the same way? And even if he did, what could come of it? She was his employee, dependent on him for her livelihood. It would be foolish and inappropriate to let her feelings show. But as she lay in bed that night, she could not help imagining what it might be like to dance with Sterling, to be held in those strong arms, to look up and find him looking back at her with something more than employer's interest. Saturday dawned bright and clear. Sterling declared they were taking the afternoon off to prepare for the dance, which sent Jake into paroxysms of complaint about lost work time. But Rosalind suspected Jake was secretly pleased to have an excuse to clean up and head into town. Rosalind carefully laid out her best dress, a deep green silk that had been her one extravagance before leaving Boston. It was slightly out of fashion now, but it fit well and brought out the color of her eyes. She heated water for a proper bath, washed and dried her long brown hair until it shone, and took more time than usual with her appearance. When she emerged from her room that evening, Sterling was waiting in the kitchen, looking uncomfortable in a proper suit. He had tamed his dark hair, shaved, and cleaned up remarkably well. When he saw her, he went completely still. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you," Rosalind said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "You clean up rather well yourself." The drive into town was quiet, both of them seeming caught in their own thoughts. The dance was being held in the church hall, and they could hear music spilling out into the evening air as they approached. Lanterns hung from the eaves, casting warm pools of light. Laughter and conversation created a cheerful din. Rosalind felt her stomach tighten with nerves as they entered. Heads turned, conversations paused. She was acutely aware of every eye on them, on her unusual height, on Sterling towering beside her. "Ignore them," Sterling murmured, his hand coming to rest lightly on the small of her back. "They will get used to it." Reverend Patterson hurried over to greet them, beaming. "So glad you could make it. The dancing is just starting. Miss Hastings, may I introduce you to some of the other ladies?" Before Rosalind could respond, she was swept into a circle of women, all talking at once. Most were friendly, curious about the newcomer. A few were cooler, their eyes assessing her expensive dress and then flicking to Sterling with barely concealed interest. "So you are working at the Iverson ranch," said a pretty blonde woman whose name Rosalind had already forgotten. "That must be quite an experience." There was something in her tone that Rosalind did not like, but she kept her voice pleasant. "It has been wonderful. Mr. Iverson is a fair employer and the work is satisfying." "I am sure it is," the blonde said, and several women giggled. Rosalind felt her temper stir. "If you have something to say, perhaps you should say it plainly." The women looked taken aback by her directness. The blonde flushed. "I just think it is unusual, a woman living alone on a ranch with two men. People talk." "Let them," Rosalind said coolly. "I know my own character, and that is all that matters to me." She excused herself and moved toward the refreshment table, angry and hurt. Was this how it was going to be? Whispers and insinuations. She should have known better than to think things would be different here. "Do not let Lydia Fletcher get to you," said a voice beside her. Rosalind turned to find a kind-faced older woman offering her a cup of punch. "She has been setting her cap at Sterling for 2 years, and she is bitter he has never given her the time of day. I am Martha Sullivan. My husband and I run the hotel." "Rosalind Hastings," Rosalind said, accepting the punch gratefully. "I know who you are, dear. And I think it is wonderful that Sterling found someone to help on the ranch. He works too hard, always has. Maybe with you there, he will take a bit more care of himself." Martha patted her arm kindly. "You hold your head high. You have done nothing wrong." The music started up again, a lively reel, and couples moved onto the dance floor. Rosalind watched wistfully, thinking of the music box upstairs in her room, of all the dances she had missed. Rosalind. Sterling appeared at her elbow, looking determined. "Would you do me the honor of dancing with me?" Rosalind stared at him. "You want to dance, here in front of everyone." "I want to dance with you," Sterling said firmly. "Here in front of everyone if you are willing." Rosalind set down her punch cup, her heart soaring. "Yes." Sterling led her onto the dance floor, and she was aware of the whispers, the stares. But then Sterling took her hand, placed his other hand on her waist, and suddenly nothing else mattered. He was tall enough that she actually had to look up to meet his eyes, something she had never experienced with a dance partner. "I should warn you, I am not very good at this," Sterling said as they began to move. He was better than he claimed, leading her confidently through the steps. Or maybe she was just too happy to notice any missteps. They moved together naturally, her height matching his stride, no awkwardness or self-consciousness. It felt right, dancing with him. It felt perfect. "Thank you for this," Rosalind said softly. "Thank you," Sterling replied, his blue eyes warm. "I have wanted to ask you to dance since the day I met you, if I am being honest." "Really?" Rosalind's heart was racing. "Really," Sterling confirmed. "You walked into my ranch yard, tall and proud and not apologizing for a single inch of yourself, and I thought you were the most magnificent woman I had ever seen." Rosalind felt tears prick her eyes. "That is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me." "It is the truth," Sterling said simply. The song ended, but before they could leave the dance floor, another began. They danced again, and then again. Other couples gave them space, creating a little bubble of privacy amid the crowd. Rosalind was vaguely aware of Lydia Fletcher glaring from the sidelines, but she found she did not care at all. After the fourth dance, they took a break, stepping outside for some air. The night was cool and clear, stars brilliant overhead. Sterling walked her a little distance from the hall to where they could hear the music but have some privacy. "Rosalind," Sterling said, turning to face her, "I need to tell you something, and I apologize if it is inappropriate or unwelcome." "What is it?" Rosalind asked, her heart in her throat. "These past 2 weeks, having you at the ranch, have been the best 2 weeks I can remember in years," Sterling said, the words tumbling out as if he had been holding them back for too long. "You are smart and capable and kind. You work hard and you do not complain. You appreciate the land and the animals. But more than that, you understand what it is like to be different. You do not make me feel like a curiosity or a freak. You make me feel like just a man who has come to care for you very much." Rosalind could barely breathe. "Sterling." "I know I am your employer and that makes this complicated," Sterling continued. "And I know you have only been here a short time, but I had to tell you how I feel. You do not have to feel the same way. Nothing has to change if you do not want it to. But I could not keep pretending that you are just my employee when the truth is I am falling in love with you." Joy exploded in Rosalind's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "I feel the same way," she said, her voice shaking. "I've been trying to tell myself I should not, that it is inappropriate and complicated, but Sterling, I cannot help it. When I am with you, I feel like I finally fit. Like I am exactly who I am supposed to be. I am falling in love with you too." Sterling's face transformed, happiness chasing away the anxiety. "You mean that?" "I mean it with every part of me," Rosalind said. Sterling reached out, cupping her face gently in his large hands. "Can I kiss you, please?" Rosalind whispered. He leaned down and she stretched up, and their lips met in a kiss that was sweet and gentle and perfect. Rosalind had never been kissed before, and she decided right then that she never wanted to kiss anyone else. Sterling's lips were soft, his touch reverent, as if she were something precious. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Sterling rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face. "You are perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Rosalind laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I am too tall and too strong and too stubborn." "Perfect," Sterling repeated firmly. "Every inch of you." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other and in the night. Finally, reluctantly, they returned to the dance hall. If anyone noticed their bright eyes and linked hands, no one said anything to their faces. They danced every dance for the rest of the evening, lost in their own world. When the night finally ended and they climbed back into the wagon for the ride home, Rosalind felt like she was floating. "What happens now?" she asked as Sterling guided the horses onto the dark road. "Well," Sterling said slowly, "I suppose that is up to you. We can court properly if you want. I can speak to Reverend Patterson, make everything official and respectable. Or, Rosalind prompted. "Or I can tell you that I already know you are the woman I want to spend my life with, and ask if you would consider marrying me," Sterling said, his voice nervous. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other 2 weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything. You are my match, Rosalind, in every way. I do not want to waste time pretending otherwise." Rosalind's breath caught. Marriage. To Sterling. A real marriage based on mutual understanding and respect and love. Everything she had hoped for when she left Boston and so much more. "Yes," she said, the word coming out strong and clear. "Yes, I will marry you." Sterling let out a whoop of joy and pulled the wagon to a halt. He jumped down and ran around to her side, lifting her down and spinning her in a circle. They were both laughing, giddy with happiness and the impossibility of it all. "I will make you happy," Sterling promised, setting her back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "I swear I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "You already make me happy," Rosalind said, reaching up to touch his face. "Happier than I ever thought I could be." They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally continued home, Sterling kept one arm around Rosalind, unwilling to let her go. Jake was waiting up when they arrived, sitting on the porch and smoking a pipe. He took one look at their faces and grinned. "Well, it is about time," he said. "I was wondering how long you two would dance around each other." "We are getting married," Sterling announced, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Congratulations," Jake said, standing to shake Sterling's hand and tip his hat to Rosalind. "Could not happen to better people. I will move some of my things out of the barn loft tomorrow, make it more comfortable. A newly married couple will want their privacy." "Thank you, Jake," Rosalind said warmly. That night, lying in her small room for what would be one of the last times, Rosalind thought about how strange life was. 2 weeks ago, she had been rejected and alone, with no prospects and little hope. Now she was engaged to a wonderful man who loved her exactly as she was. She felt like she had stepped into a fairy tale. The next morning, Sterling rode into town first thing and spoke to Reverend Patterson. The Reverend was delighted by the news and agreed to perform the ceremony the following Saturday. A week seemed like an eternity to Rosalind, but Sterling insisted they do things properly. "I want everyone to know you are my wife," he said. "I want them to see that Theodore Walsh was a fool and I am the luckiest man alive." The week passed in a blur of preparations. Martha Sullivan heard the news and immediately took Rosalind under her wing, helping her find fabric to make a proper wedding dress. Several other women in town, seeing that Rosalind had Sterling's protection and approval, became friendlier. Lydia Fletcher continued to glare, but Rosalind found she could ignore it easily now. Sterling worked like a man possessed, making improvements to the house in preparation for his bride. He cleared out his mother's things from the master bedroom, repainted the walls, bought a new quilt from the general store. He built Rosalind a bookshelf for all the books he planned to buy her. He was like a child at Christmas, excited about every small detail. On the Thursday before the wedding, a dress arrived at the ranch, delivered by Ben. Sterling had special ordered it from San Francisco without telling Rosalind. It was beautiful, made of cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. And most importantly, it was made for a tall woman. The skirt fell to exactly the right length, the sleeves were long enough, the bodice fit perfectly. "How did you know my measurements?" Rosalind asked, tears streaming down her face. "I asked Mrs. Chen," Sterling admitted, looking pleased with himself. "I wanted you to have a dress that fit right, that made you feel as beautiful as you are." Rosalind threw her arms around his neck, kissing him soundly. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Sterling said, holding her close. "I cannot wait to marry you." Saturday arrived bright and clear, perfect weather for a wedding. Rosalind dressed carefully in her new gown, her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style. Martha Sullivan and several other women came to the ranch to help her prepare, chattering excitedly and offering advice for married life that made Rosalind blush. When she walked into the church on Ben's arm, having no family of her own to escort her, the sight of Sterling waiting at the altar took her breath away. He wore a new suit, his hair neatly combed, and the expression on his face when he saw her was one of absolute adoration. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Reverend Patterson spoke about love and partnership, about finding someone who truly understood you. When Sterling slipped a gold ring onto Rosalind's finger, his hands were shaking. When she said, "I do," her voice rang out clear and certain. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Patterson declared. Sterling, you may kiss your bride. Sterling cupped Rosalind's face in his hands and kissed her sweetly, and the small congregation erupted in applause. Rosalind felt joy bubble up inside her, pure and effervescent. She was married. She was Mrs. Sterling Iverson. She had found her place in the world. The reception was held in the church hall, the same place where they had danced just 2 weeks before. There was food and music and genuine happiness. Even Theodore Walsh made an appearance, though he looked sour and left quickly. Rosalind barely noticed him. Her attention was entirely on her husband, on the way he smiled at her, the way he kept her close to his side as if afraid she might disappear. When the sun began to set, Sterling and Rosalind said their goodbyes and headed home. Home. Rosalind loved the sound of that word. The ranch was her home now, Sterling was her home. That night, in the master bedroom that Sterling had prepared so carefully, they came together as husband and wife. Sterling was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure Rosalind felt safe and loved. It was awkward in places, both of them being inexperienced, but it was also beautiful. Afterward, lying in Sterling's arms, Rosalind felt a completeness she had never known before. Happy, Sterling murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Beyond measure, Rosalind replied, snuggling closer. I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find this was all a dream. It is real, Sterling promised. You are mine and I am yours, and that is never going to change. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Rosalind's life. She threw herself into ranch work with renewed energy, taking pride in building something alongside her husband. Sterling taught her to ride properly, to rope cattle, to read the weather. They worked hard during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal enthusiasm. Jake became a kind of older brother to them both, gruff but affectionate. He had been alone for a long time, he admitted one night over dinner, and having a family of sorts again felt good. As summer progressed, the ranch prospered. The calves grew strong, the cattle fattened on the good grass. Sterling bought more land, expanding his holdings. He consulted Rosalind on every decision, valuing her opinion and her insight. They were true partners in every sense of the word. In August, Rosalind realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, then another, before finally telling Sterling. They were in the barn, checking on a lame horse when she said, I think I am with child. Sterling went absolutely still. Then he let out a whoop that startled the horses and swept Rosalind into his arms, spinning her around just as he had the night they got engaged. A baby, he said, his voice choked with emotion. We are having a baby. Are you happy? Rosalind asked, though she could see the answer on his face. I am more than happy, Sterling said, setting her down gently and placing a hand on her still flat stomach. I am blessed. Rosalind, you have given me everything. A home, a partner, and now a child. I do not deserve you. Yes, you do, Rosalind said firmly. We deserve each other. We deserve this happiness. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Rosalind continued to work on the ranch through the fall, though Sterling became increasingly protective, trying to keep her from doing anything too strenuous. She humored him because she knew it came from love, but she also insisted on staying active. I am not made of glass, she would remind him when he fussed too much. I know, Sterling would reply. But you are carrying the most precious thing in the world, and I want to take care of you both. Winter came, cold and crisp. The ranch work slowed, and they spent more evenings by the fire, reading together or just talking. Sterling would place his hand on Rosalind's growing belly and marvel at the life they had created together. On a snowy February morning in 1879, Rosalind went into labor. Martha Sullivan and the midwife, Mrs. Garcia, came to help. Sterling paced the kitchen, pale and anxious, while Jake tried to distract him with conversation. The labor was long but not overly difficult. Rosalind was strong, her tall frame handling the process well. When the baby finally arrived, crying lustily, Mrs. Garcia announced, "It is a boy, a healthy, beautiful boy." Sterling burst into the bedroom, not caring about propriety, and rushed to Rosalind's side. She was exhausted but radiant, holding their son against her chest. "Look," she whispered. "Look what we made." Sterling stared down at the baby, tears streaming down his face. The child was indeed beautiful, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that might turn blue like his father's. And he was long, his tiny body already showing signs that he would be tall like his parents. "He is perfect," Sterling said, his voice breaking. Thank you for this gift." "We need to name him," Rosalind said, stroking the baby's soft cheek. They had discussed names extensively during the pregnancy. For a boy, they had settled on Samuel, after Sterling's father, with the middle name Robert, after Rosalind's father. "Samuel Robert Iverson," Sterling said, trying the name out. "Welcome to the world, son." The months that followed were exhausting but wonderful. Baby Samuel was a good child, healthy and happy. He ate well and slept reasonably well, and both parents doted on him shamelessly. Sterling was a natural father, gentle and patient, singing the same songs to Samuel that he had once sung while working. Rosalind marveled at how her life had changed. Just over a year ago, she had been a rejected mail-order bride with no prospects and little hope. Now she had a husband who adored her, a son she loved more than life itself, and a home where she truly belonged. As Samuel grew, it became clear he had inherited his parents' height. At his first birthday, he was already bigger than most children twice his age. Rosalind and Sterling would exchange knowing looks, remembering what it was like to be the tall child, and silently promised to make sure their son never felt like being different was a bad thing. The ranch continued to prosper. Word spread about the quality of Sterling's cattle, and buyers came from as far as San Francisco. Sterling hired 2 more hands to help with the expanded herd, and they built additional outbuildings. Rosalind kept the books, managed the household, and continued to work alongside Sterling when she could. On their 2nd anniversary, Sterling took Rosalind on a trip to the ocean, something she had always wanted to see. They left Samuel with Jake and Martha, who were both delighted to dote on the child, and spent 3 glorious days at the coast. Rosalind stood at the edge of the Pacific, feeling the spray on her face and the wind in her hair, and thought about how far she had come. "Thank you for this," she said, taking Sterling's hand. "Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me," Sterling replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely rancher who fell in love with you at first sight." "It was not much of a chance," Rosalind said, smiling up at him. "I fell in love with you just as fast." They walked along the beach, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for the future. Sterling wanted to expand the ranch further, maybe buy the property to the east. Rosalind wanted to start a small school on the ranch, teaching Samuel and any other children in the area. They both wanted more children, siblings for Samuel. "I want at least 4, Sterling said. "Maybe 5. "Let us see how the next one goes before we commit to 5, Rosalind said, laughing. "Are you?" Sterling asked, his eyes lighting up. "I think so," Rosalind confirmed. "It is early yet, but yes, I think I am pregnant again." Sterling picked her up and spun her around just as he had done so many times before, his joy infectious and complete. Their 2nd child, a daughter they named Sarah Margaret, arrived that December. She was smaller than Samuel had been, but just as healthy, with her mother's brown hair and her father's blue eyes. Sterling was, if possible, even more protective of his tiny daughter than he had been during Rosalind's first pregnancy. "She is so small," he would say, cradling Sarah in his huge hands. "So perfect." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Sterling and Rosalind's love deepened with each passing year. They weathered challenges together, dry summers and harsh winters, a cattle disease that required careful management, the occasional difficult neighbor. But they faced everything side by side, partners in every sense of the word. Samuel grew into a serious, intelligent boy who loved books as much as his parents did. At 7, he was already as tall as most 10-year-olds, but he carried himself with confidence, never apologizing for his height. Sterling and Rosalind made sure of that, teaching him to be proud of who he was. Sarah was bright and energetic, a whirlwind of activity who kept everyone on their toes. She had her father's height, shooting up like a weed, and her mother's determination. At 5, she declared she was going to be a rancher like her papa, and she followed Sterling around constantly, imitating everything he did. 2 more children followed, another boy named Robert James and a daughter named Sophie Grace. The house was full of noise and laughter, of children's questions and games and small dramas. Sterling built an addition to the house, adding more bedrooms and a proper study where Rosalind could keep the ranch books and Sterling could read in the evenings. On their 10th anniversary, Sterling surprised Rosalind with a trip to San Francisco. They had not been away together since Samuel was a baby, and the city was a revelation. They attended the theater, ate at fancy restaurants, and stayed in a hotel with actual running water. It was wonderful, but by the 3rd day they were both homesick for the ranch and their children. "We have become old, settled folks," Rosalind said, laughing at themselves as they boarded the train home. "I do not mind," Sterling said, pulling her close, "as long as I am settled with you." The years continued to pass. Jake eventually retired from active ranch work, but stayed on in a small house Sterling built for him on the property. He became a beloved grandfather figure to the children, teaching them to fish and telling them exaggerated stories of the old days. Samuel grew into a young man, tall and broad like his father, with his mother's intelligence and thoughtfulness. At 18, he announced he wanted to attend university in San Francisco to study agriculture science, and then come back to help run the ranch with more modern methods. Sterling and Rosalind were proud beyond measure. Sarah declared at 15 that she had no intention of ever marrying. She just wanted to run a ranch of her own. Sterling quietly began setting aside a parcel of land for her, planning to deed it to her when she turned 21. Robert and Sophie were still children, full of energy and mischief, keeping their parents young. One evening, when Sterling was in his early 50s and Rosalind in her mid-40s, they sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set over the mountains. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and peaceful. They could hear the children inside, arguing good-naturedly about something, and Jake's distinctive laugh as he mediated. "You ever think about that day you arrived in Calistoga?" Sterling asked, taking Rosalind's hand. "Of course," Rosalind said. "I think about how terrified I was, how alone I felt, and I think about how Theodore Walsh's rejection was the best thing that ever happened to me. I think about how I almost did not go to town that day," Sterling said. "I almost sent Jake for the supplies. If I had, I never would have met you. But you did go," Rosalind said, squeezing his hand. "And you saw a too tall, rejected mail-order bride and decided to give her a chance." "I saw the woman I was going to marry," Sterling corrected. "I knew at the moment I laid eyes on you. You were perfect then, and you are perfect now." Rosalind leaned her head on Sterling's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she said. I have loved you for half my life now, and I will love you for the other half too." "I love you too," Sterling replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "My tall, strong, perfect wife." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Inside the house, their children laughed and called for them to come settle an argument. Jake's voice rumbled something indistinct, probably taking one side or the other just to be contrary. This was her life, Rosalind thought. This beautiful, full, chaotic, wonderful life. She had traveled across the country as a rejected bride, too tall and too different to fit into the narrow confines of what society expected. And she had found a man who looked at her and saw not someone too much of anything, but someone who was exactly right. She had found her home, her partner, her love. She had found Sterling, who had looked at her that first day and said, in word and deed, "You are perfect." And she was. They both were. Perfect for each other, perfect together, perfect in the life they had built. As they rose to go inside, to their children and their home, Rosalind looked up at the stars and sent a silent thank you to whatever force had brought her to Calistoga, California in the spring of 1878. She had been looking for a husband, for security, for a place to belong. She had found so much more. She had found everything. Years continued to roll by like the seasons, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Samuel returned from university with new ideas and a sweetheart, a practical young woman named Elizabeth who was nearly as tall as he was. They married in 1889, and Sterling deeded them a portion of the ranch to manage. Rosalind watched her eldest son say his vows and remembered her own wedding day, the joy and hope she had felt. Samuel had that same look in his eyes when he gazed at Elizabeth, and it warmed her heart. Sarah, true to her word, showed no interest in marriage. Instead, at 21, she took possession of her own land and began building her own small ranch. She had her father's gift with cattle and her mother's head for business. Neighbors were scandalized by a young, unmarried woman running her own operation, but Sarah did not care, and neither did Sterling and Rosalind. They had raised their children to be true to themselves, consequences be damned. Robert followed a different path entirely, discovering a talent for woodworking. He set up a shop in Calistoga and became known throughout the region for his beautiful, sturdy furniture. Sophie, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening the very school on the ranch property that Rosalind had dreamed of years before. Sterling and Rosalind watched their children build their own lives with pride and occasional worry, as all parents do. But mostly with satisfaction, knowing they had raised good people who were confident in themselves and kind to others. In 1895, when Sterling was 58 and Rosalind was 51, their first grandchild arrived. Samuel and Elizabeth's son, named Sterling after his grandfather, was a healthy, squalling baby who immediately wrapped his grandparents around his tiny fingers. More grandchildren followed over the years, filling the ranch with new laughter and energy. Jake passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1897 at the age of 76. The whole community turned out for his funeral, and Sterling gave a eulogy that had everyone in tears, talking about the old cowboy's loyalty, wisdom, and dry humor. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains he had loved. As Sterling and Rosalind moved into their 60s, they gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to Samuel and Elizabeth, though Sterling still insisted on helping with the cattle. Rosalind spent more time with her grandchildren, teaching them to read and filling their heads with stories. She also began writing down her own story, wanting future generations to know how their grandmother had come to California as a rejected mail-order bride and found love and belonging. On a spring morning in 1903, Sterling and Rosalind celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. All their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted 2 days. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and so much love it seemed to overflow the very walls of the house. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed or headed home, Sterling and Rosalind walked out to the place where they had first kissed, that magical night after the first dance. 25 years, Rosalind said, shaking her head in wonder. It has gone so fast. And yet it feels like I have known you forever, Sterling said, pulling her close. His hair was gray now, his face lined with years of sun and wind, but his blue eyes were as bright as ever, and the way he looked at Rosalind had not changed. "We have built something good, have we not?" Rosalind asked, leaning into his embrace. "We have built something magnificent," Sterling corrected. "A family, a home, a legacy. And it all started because Theodore Walsh was fool enough to reject you." Rosalind laughed, the same clear, joyous sound that had first captivated Sterling all those years ago. "I should probably write him a thank-you note. Now that I would like to see," Sterling said, grinning. They stood there under the stars, holding each other and remembering. They thought about all the moments that had brought them here, the big ones and the small ones. The first time Sterling had said, "You are perfect," the first dance, the first kiss, their wedding day, the births of their children, the quiet evenings by the fire, the challenges they had faced together, the laughter and tears and ordinary miracles of a life shared. "If you could go back," Sterling asked, "knowing everything that would happen, would you still get on that train in Boston?" "In a heartbeat," Rosalind said without hesitation. "Every moment of fear and uncertainty was worth it to find you, to build this life with you." "I feel the same way," Sterling said, kissing her forehead, then her cheek, then finally her lips, a sweet kiss that spoke of 25 years of love and the promise of many more to come. They walked back to the house hand in hand, past the barn where Buttercup the cow had lived out her days, past the garden Rosalind had planted and tended for 2 decades, past the place where each of their children had taken their first steps. The house glowed with warm lamplight, welcoming them home. Inside, they could hear Sophie playing the piano, a gift from Robert, and the voices of grandchildren begging for one more story before bed. It was the sound of family, of belonging, of home. Sterling and Rosalind exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications that long-married couples perfect. A look that said, "This is what we made together. This is what we were meant for. This is our happily ever after," and it was. Their story had started with rejection and uncertainty, with a too-tall woman stepping off a train in a strange town with no prospects and little hope. It had started with a lonely rancher looking for help and finding instead the missing piece of his soul. But more than anything, their story was proof that sometimes the things that make us different, the things that society tells us are flaws or failings, are actually the very things that lead us to where we are meant to be. Rosalind's height had gotten her rejected by one small-minded man, but it had also led her to Sterling, who saw in her not someone too much of anything, but someone who was exactly, perfectly right. As they climbed the stairs to their bedroom that night, Rosalind thought about the young woman she had been, standing on that train platform with a rejection letter in her hands. She wished she could tell that frightened girl that everything was going to be all right, more than all right. That the rejection was not an ending but a beginning. That the best parts of her life were just ahead, waiting for her to be brave enough to reach for them. But that young woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, happier, more fully herself. A woman who had found her place in the world. A woman who had found love. A wife, a mother, a grandmother, a partner, a friend. A woman who was and always had been perfect, just as she was, the end.